The morning rush on New Geneva Station had finally died down, leaving Marcus Vale alone with the familiar aroma of roasted coffee beans and the gentle hum of the air recyclers. His little café, Earth's Bounty, occupied a modest corner space in the station's commercial district, squeezed between a Zentarian crystal shop and a repair bay for atmospheric suits. The sign outside, painted in warm earth tones, promised authentic earth cuisine in 17 different languages. Marcus wiped down the counter for the third time that morning, a nervous habit he'd developed since opening 6 months ago. Business was steady, mostly humans homesick for familiar flavors, but he dreamed of expanding his clientele to include the dozens of alien species that called the station home. Most non-humans found Earth food too bland or too intense, depending on their physiology. The cafe door chimed softly as someone entered. Marcus looked up from his inventory tablet to see a figure unlike any he'd encountered in his 2 years on the station. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, with pearl-white skin that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Intricate silver markings traced delicate patterns across her face and visible arms, like living tattoos that pulsed faintly with each heartbeat. Her hair, if it could be called hair, appeared to be spun from starlight itself, flowing in impossible waves that defied the station's artificial gravity. She was breathtaking, and she was clearly starving. The elegant drape of her midnight blue robes couldn't hide how they hung loose on her frame. Her luminous golden eyes, large and expressive, darted nervously around the cafe before settling on the display case of pastries. When she swayed slightly on her feet, Marcus's instincts kicked in. "Hey there," he said gently, setting down his tablet. "You okay?" She turned those remarkable eyes toward him, and he saw a flicker of surprise cross her features. "I forgive the intrusion," she said, her voice melodic despite the obvious fatigue. "I smelled something wonderful and thought perhaps ... double quotes." She trailed off, looking embarrassed. Marcus glanced at the chronometer on the wall. Nearly noon, and judging by her condition, she hadn't eaten in quite some time. "When's the last time you had a meal?" "Time moves differently between species," she replied diplomatically, but the way she clutched the edge of his counter told the real story. Without hesitation, Marcus moved toward his small kitchen area. "I was just about to have breakfast myself. Join me?" "Oh no, I couldn't impose." "No imposition," Marcus insisted, already pulling out an extra mug. "I hate eating alone anyway." He prepared 2 cups of his finest Colombian blend, the coffee beans he'd splurged on from a shipment that cost nearly a week's profits. The rich, dark roast filled the cafe with its intoxicating aroma. To this, he added 2 of his grandmother's cinnamon rolls, fresh from the warming oven, their glaze still glistening. "I'm Marcus, by the way," he said, setting the feast on a small table near the window, overlooking the station's central promenade. "Zephyra," she replied, approaching the table with careful, almost reverent steps. "Of the Luminari." He'd heard of the Luminari, one of the more reclusive species in this sector. They were known for their ethereal beauty and their complex social customs, though few humans had direct contact with them. "Please sit," Marcus said, pulling out a chair for her. "Try the coffee first. It's a human stimulant, but it shouldn't be harmful to your physiology." Zephyra settled into the chair with fluid grace, her robes arranging themselves around her like liquid shadow. She lifted the mug with both hands, inhaling the steam that rose from the dark surface. Her eyes widened in wonder. "The aroma alone is ... double quotes." She paused, searching for words. "It's like capturing a star in ceramic," Marcus grinned. "Wait until you taste it." She took a tentative sip, and the transformation was immediate and dramatic. The silver markings on her skin began to pulse more rapidly, shifting from their subtle glow to a brilliant luminescence that cast dancing patterns of light across the cafe walls. Her eyes, already large, seemed to expand further as her pupils dilated with what could only be described as bliss. "By the eternal void," she breathed, her voice taking on an almost musical quality. "What is this nectar?" "Just coffee," Marcus said, charmed by her reaction. "Try the pastry." Zephyra bit into the cinnamon roll, and if her response to the coffee had been dramatic, this was nothing short of theatrical. She made a sound that was part sigh, part harmony, a note so pure and sweet it made Marcus's heart skip. The luminescence of her markings spread, creating intricate patterns that flowed like liquid light across her skin. "In all my cycles of existence," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "I have never experienced such perfect harmony of flavor." Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with his own coffee. There was something deeply satisfying about watching someone discover simple pleasures for the first time. "I'm glad you like it." As Zephyra continued to eat, Marcus noticed other patrons beginning to stare. A Zentarian couple at a corner table whispered among themselves, their crystalline features refracting the light from Zephyra's markings into rainbow patterns on the walls. Even the normally stoic Valderan mechanic from the repair bay next door had pressed his face against the window to get a better look. "You're quite the sensation," Marcus observed quietly. Zephyra followed his gaze and immediately dimmed her markings, the light fading to barely visible. "Forgive me. I forgot myself. Your offering has affected me more profoundly than I anticipated." "Offering?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. She set down her mug with suddenly formal precision. "Among the Luminari, the sharing of sustenance is not taken lightly. When one accepts nourishment freely given during a time of need, it creates what we call a resonance bond." "A what now?" "I am now bound to you, Marcus of Earth's bounty," she said, her golden eyes meeting his with startling intensity. "By ancient law and sacred custom, I am your protector until the resonance finds balance." Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the cafe door chimed again. A burly Torgan freight hauler stumbled in, clearly having started his drinking early despite the hour. His multiple eyes were bloodshot, and the stench of fermented Altarian grain alcohol preceded him like a toxic cloud. "Human!" the Torgan bellowed, swaying on his 6 legs. "Your sign says authentic Earth cuisine, but I've tasted better food from a recycler." Marcus sighed inwardly. He'd dealt with the Torgan before, a difficult customer even when sober. "I'm sorry you weren't satisfied with your previous order, Greg. Perhaps nothing." Greg lurched forward, his massive bulk heading straight for Marcus's counter. "I want my credits back, and I want—" The sound that emerged from Zephyra's throat stopped the Torgan mid-sentence and sent a shiver down Marcus's spine. It was a harmonious note, but one that carried unmistakable menace, like the song of a celestial choir warning of divine retribution. The very air in the cafe seemed to vibrate with the frequency. Zephyra rose from her chair with liquid grace, positioning herself between Marcus and the advancing Torgan. The silver markings on her skin blazed with brilliant light, creating patterns that seemed to shift and writhe with their own life. Her starlight hair began to move with an otherworldly wind that existed only around her. "You will not approach my residence bound," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the cafe's windows hum in sympathy. "Withdraw now, or face the consequences of disturbing sacred law." Greg's multiple eyes widened as he took in the sight before him. Even drunk, he recognized the signs of a Luminari in full defensive mode. The stories of their capabilities were legendary throughout the sector. I didn't know you were claimed human," Greg mumbled, backing toward the door. "No disrespect intended. None taken," Marcus said quickly, still stunned by Zephyra's transformation. "Maybe come back when you're feeling better?" The Torgan fled, the door chiming frantically as it slid shut behind him. Marcus turned to Zephyra, who was already returning to her normal luminescence. though she remained standing between him and the door. Was that really necessary? Completely, she replied without hesitation. The resonance bond is sacred among my people. Until it finds balance, your safety is my primary concern. And how exactly does this bond find balance? Zephyra tilted her head, considering. Traditionally, when you perform an act of equal significance for me, or when I preserve your life from mortal danger. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, processing this information. So you're basically my bodyguard until you save my life, or I do something equally nice for you. A simplistic but adequate summary, she confirmed. He looked at this ethereal being who had just faced down a creature 3 times her size to protect him, all because he'd shared his breakfast. There were worse fates, he supposed. Well then, Marcus said, returning to his seat and gesturing for her to do the same. I guess we should get to know each other better. More coffee? Zephyra's luminous smile could have powered the entire station. The acoustic guitar strings sang under Finn Atcher's calloused fingertips, the melody drifting through the bustling marketplace of Kepler Station like smoke through a crowded room. His weathered leather case lay open at his feet, scattered with credits from passers-by who appreciated the rare sound of live music in the depths of space. The station's artificial atmosphere carried his voice well, though it could never match the way music moved through real air under an open sky. Finn had been wandering the outer colonies for 3 years now, ever since the divorce papers were signed and his former life on Mars became too painful to bear. Music was his companion, his therapy, and his livelihood. Today's earnings would buy him passage to the next system, where he'd find another corner to play and another crowd to move with his songs. He was halfway through an old Earth ballad when he noticed her dot. She lurked in the shadows between vendor stalls, just at the edge of the marketplace's main thoroughfare. Her species was unfamiliar to him, but striking in a way that made his fingers almost miss their chord progression. Her skin was a deep purple, so dark it was nearly black, shot through with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed gently like a slow heartbeat. These patterns traced elegant lines along her arms, neck, and face, creating a living constellation that shifted and flowed with her emotions. What caught Finn's attention most, however, was the way she swayed to his music. Not the casual head bobbing of a casual listener, but a deep, rhythmic movement that suggested music was as essential to her as breathing. Her large, violet eyes were closed, and her lips moved silently, as if she were singing along to melodies only she could hear. When his song ended, she opened her eyes, and their gazes met across the crowded marketplace. For a moment, the station's noise seemed to fade, leaving only the echo of his guitar and the strange sense that something significant had just occurred. She approached hesitantly, moving with a fluid grace that reminded Finn of dancers he'd known back on Earth. Up close, he could see that her bioluminescent patterns were intricate beyond belief, forming swirling galaxies across her dark skin that pulsed in time with the residual rhythm of his music. Melodies, she said, her voice soft and melodious with an accent he couldn't place. They carry the old harmonies. How do you know the songs of the deep void? Finn tilted his head, fingers still resting on his guitar strings. I'm sorry, I don't understand. These are human songs from Earth. Her violet eyes widened in surprise. Impossible. The resonance patterns match the fundamental frequencies of creation itself. No single species could discover such perfect mathematical relationships independently. Mathematical relationships? Finn chuckled, though not unkindly. I just play what sounds good, though you seem to know more about music theory than most of my audiences. Something in her expression shifted, becoming guarded. I once studied such things. Before my exile, the word exile hung heavy between them, and Finn recognized the weight of it. He'd been something of an exile himself, though his had been self-imposed. What's your name? Nix, she replied, and added with formal precision. formerly of the Third Harmonic Collective, Umbral Sector 12. Finn Atcher, formerly of Mars Colony, currently of wherever the music takes me. He gestured to the small folding chair he kept for breaks. Want to sit? You look like you haven't eaten in a while. It was true. Despite her otherworldly beauty, Nyx had the hollow look of someone who'd been surviving on too little for too long. Her dark robes, which might once have been elegant, hung loose on her frame. I couldn't impose, she began. No imposition, Finn interrupted, already reaching into his travel pack. I was about to take a break anyway. He pulled out his simple lunch, a nutrient bar, some dried fruit from the agricultural decks, and a bottle of synthesized juice that almost tasted like the orange groves of his childhood. Nothing fancy, but honest food that had sustained him through countless journeys. Please, he said, breaking the nutrient bar in half and offering her the larger piece. A fellow musician shouldn't have to go hungry. Nyx accepted the food with trembling hands, and as she did, her bioluminescent patterns flared brighter. You would share your sustenance while music still echoes in the air? Sure, Finn said, settling back with his guitar. Music and food go together, don't they? Want me to play something while we eat? Aye. Yes, Nyx whispered, her patterns now pulsing with complex rhythms. Please. Finn began a gentle finger-picking pattern, one of his own compositions inspired by the view of nebulae through his transport's viewport. As the notes filled the air around them, Nyx bit into the nutrient bar with an expression of profound concentration. What happened next was unlike anything Finn had ever experienced. Nyx's voice rose to meet his guitar, weaving through his melody with harmonies, so perfect they seemed to make the very air shimmer. Her voice had an otherworldly quality, like the sound of stellar wind given form, and her bioluminescent patterns began to dance in time with their improvised duet. Other shoppers stopped to listen, drawn by the impossible beauty of their combined music. That was ... double quotes, Finn reffed when the song naturally concluded. Harmony bond is formed, Nyx said solemnly, though her patterns pulsed with what looked like joy. By sharing sustenance while music flows between souls, you have created a sacred connection among my people. I am now bound to guard your creative spirit. Guard my what now? Before Nyx could explain, a commotion erupted nearby. A Terran security officer was approaching their impromptu concert area, his expression stern and official. Hey, street performer, the officer called out. You have a license for public musical performances? Finn's heart sank. He'd been careful to check local regulations, but Kepler Station's bureaucracy was notorious for its constantly changing rules. I thought the marketplace was open for buskers. New ordinance as of yesterday, the officer said, pulling out a citation pad. All musical performances require advance registration and a cultural impact assessment. That's going to be a hefty fine. As the officer stepped closer, something extraordinary happened. The shadows around Nyx deepened and spread, creating pools of darkness that seemed to swallow the marketplace's artificial lighting. The bioluminescent patterns on her skin shifted from gentle pulses to sharp, angular designs that looked almost aggressive. You will not interrupt the harmony, she said, her melodious voice taking on harmonics that made nearby metal surfaces vibrate ominously. The bond is sacred. The music must not be silenced by bureaucratic discord. The shadows continued to spread, creating an almost physical barrier between the officer and Finn. Other shoppers backed away nervously as the temperature in their immediate vicinity seemed to drop several degrees. What the hell? The officer stammered, his hand moving instinctively toward his stun weapon. It's okay, Finn said quickly, standing and placing a gentle hand on Nyx's shoulder. Where he touched her, the aggressive patterns on her skin softened back into flowing spirals. We were just finishing up anyway. No need for citations or shadow manipulation. NYX's violet eyes met his, and slowly the darkness receded. If you are certain, harmony bound. I'm certain, Finn assured her, then looked at the bewildered officer. We'll pack up now. No trouble intended. The officer, clearly out of his depth when it came to alien customs and shadow-based defensive systems, decided discretion was the better part of valor. Just make sure you get proper permits next time, he muttered, backing away quickly as the crowd dispersed and the marketplace returned to normal. Finn looked at Nix with new understanding. So this harmony bond thing means you're going to protect my music? Your creative spirit, she corrected. Among the Umbral, music is considered the highest expression of the soul. To share food while harmonies flow is to entrust another with your spiritual essence. I must guard it against all who would silence or corrupt it. Finn considered this as he packed his guitar. In his wandering years, he'd often felt like his music was all he had left that was truly his own. The idea of someone willing to defend it seemed both touching and slightly overwhelming. What happened to your collective? He asked gently as they gathered his belongings. Nix's patterns dimmed. I composed a song that challenged the traditional harmonies. The elders deemed it discordant with our ancient ways. I was exiled for introducing chaos into the eternal symphony. Sounds like they were afraid of a little innovation, Finn observed. Perhaps, she said quietly. But now I have found new harmonies to protect. Where do we travel next? Harmony bound. Finn looked at this remarkable being who had just manipulated shadows to defend his right to play music, who understood melodies in ways he'd never imagined possible, and who had been cast out for the crime of creative thinking. I hear the Centauri system has some interesting acoustic properties, he said with a smile. Want to find out what kind of music we can make there? Nix's bioluminescent patterns blazed with what could only be described as happiness. I would be honored to share such explorations with you. As they walked toward the transport docks together, Finn couldn't help but notice that their footsteps seemed to fall into a natural rhythm, like the beginning of a song yet to be written. The trading post on Nexus 7 clung to life at the intersection of three major shipping lanes. A ramshackle collection of prefabricated modules and converted cargo containers that served as humanity's most remote outpost in the Helix sector. For Davin Cross, it was both a regular stop and a reminder of how far he'd traveled from the comfortable spice markets of Earth. His ship, the Saffron Dream, sat in the station's modest docking bay, her cargo hold filled with the aromatic treasures that made his dangerous profession worthwhile. Cardamom from the mist-shrouded valleys of Kepler 442b, vanilla pods cultivated in the orbital gardens of New Madagascar, and his most prized possession, a small but precious store of genuine earth chili peppers, worth their weight in processed platinum in certain sectors. Davin walked through the trading post's main corridor, his worn leather jacket bearing the subtle stains and lingering aromas of 100 different worlds. His dark hair was tied back practically, and his green eyes constantly assessed potential threats and opportunities with equal measure. 3 years of running spices through pirate-infested space had honed his survival instincts to a razor's edge. The trading post's cantina was a dimly lit affair, frequented by smugglers, legitimate traders, and various beings of questionable reputation. Davin had come here not for the company, but for information about the route to his next destination. The Pirathi Collective had placed an order for exotic spices that would set him up financially for months, if he could safely navigate the contested zones to reach them. He was nursing a synthetic whiskey and reviewing star charts when she caught his attention. She sat alone at a corner table, her presence commanding even in stillness. Her copper-red skin seemed to glow with an inner fire, and her hair, if it could be called hair, moved like living flames, shifting from deep crimson to bright orange in patterns that suggested controlled combustion rather than mere biology. She was tall and powerfully built, with the kind of refined muscle that spoke of both combat training and natural athleticism. What drew Davin's notice, however, wasn't her striking appearance, but the fact that she was clearly in trouble. Her elegant armor, marked with intricate flame motifs, bore fresh scorch marks and what looked like plasma burns. Her posture spoke of exhaustion barely held in check, and when she thought no one was looking, her flame hair dimmed to almost nothing. A disgraced warrior, if Davin had to guess. He'd seen enough of them in the outer colonies to recognize the signs. His contemplation was interrupted when 3 Korthic mercenaries swaggered into the cantina, their reptilian features twisted into expressions of predatory satisfaction. They were the kind of hired muscle that made trading post-life dangerous for anyone without proper protection. Well, the largest Korthic hissed, his forked tongue tasting the air. Look what we have here. A fallen flame dancer, drinking alone. The copper-skinned woman, clearly Pirathi, Davin realized didn't look up from her drink. I have no quarrel with you, Scaleskin, but we have business with you. Tempest of the Dying Ember, the Korthic leader continued, his claws clicking against the metal table as he leaned closer. Our employer is very interested in collecting the bounty on your head. Now Davin understood. This was a bounty situation, and while he generally avoided getting involved in others' problems, something about the scene bothered him. Maybe it was the way the 3 mercenaries were positioning themselves to cut off her escape routes. Or maybe it was the fact that she was clearly injured and outnumbered. Or maybe it was the way her flame hair flickered with what looked suspiciously like resignation. Acting on instinct rather than wisdom. Davin stood and walked over to their table. Excuse me, he said politely, but I believe this lady is expecting me. All 4 aliens turned to stare at him. The Korthics with suspicion, the Pirathi woman Tempest with surprise. Human, the lead mercenary growled. This is not your concern. Walk away while you still can. Afraid I can't do that, Davin replied, settling into the chair across from Tempest. We have business to discuss. Trade business. It was a transparent bluff, but it might buy them some time. He opened his jacket slightly, letting the mingled aromas of his spice samples waft into the air. The effect on Tempest was immediate and dramatic. Her flame hair brightened, and her nostrils flared as she caught the scent. Is that ... double quote? She whispered, her voice carrying an odd harmonic that made the air around them feel warmer. Among other things, Davin confirmed, pulling out a small vial of ground chili powder. Care to sample the merchandise? Without waiting for an answer, he retrieved his personal meal from his jacket pocket, a simple sandwich he'd packed for the journey, but one seasoned with a blend of spices that included genuine earth peppers. He broke it in half and offered her the larger portion. On the house, he said. Professional courtesy between traders. The Korthics were growing impatient. Human, you have 10 seconds to... Tempest bit into the sandwich, and the world changed. The explosion of flavor across her face was matched by a literal explosion of heat in the air around them. Her flame hair erupted into a brilliant corona of fire, and waves of intense heat radiated outward from her body. The temperature in their immediate vicinity jumped by at least 20 degrees, making the air shimmer like a mirage. But more than that, her entire posture transformed. Where moments before she had seemed resigned and defeated, now she blazed with renewed vitality. The copper patterns on her skin began to glow like heated metal, and when she looked up at the Korthic mercenaries, her eyes burned with literal fire. You dare threaten one who has shared the sacred flames with me? She said, her voice now carrying harmonics that made the cantina's metal fixtures ping with thermal expansion. You dare interrupt the flame-sharing ritual of my people? The lead Korthic took an involuntary step backward as the heat became almost unbearable. What sorcery is this? Not sorcery, Tempest said, rising to her full impressive height. The flames of her hair now licked at the cantina's low ceiling, and her skin glowed like forged metal. Sacred law. This human has shared spiced sustenance with me while I was in need. By the ancient codes of the Pirathi, we are now flame-bound. To threaten him is to face the wrath of our eternal fires. Davin, sweating profusely in the intense heat, but trying to look calm, watched as the three mercenaries weighed their options. Fighting a Pirathi warrior in full flame rage was generally considered a form of elaborate suicide. This isn't over. Flame Dancer, the leader hissed, but he was already backing toward the exit. The bounty stands. Let them come, Tempest replied, her voice crackling like a forge fire. They will find more than they bargained for. Once the mercenaries had fled, the temperature in the cantina slowly returned to normal. Tempest's flame hair settled back to a more manageable burn, though she continued to radiate warmth like a living hearth. Well, Davin said, mopping his brow with a napkin, that was interesting. Care to explain what just happened? Tempest resumed her seat, her fiery eyes studying him with new intensity. You shared spiced food with me during my time of dishonor. Among the Pirathi, spices are sacred. They represent the fire of life itself. To offer them freely creates what we call a flame bond. And that means? I am now bound to protect you as fiercely as I would guard the sacred flames of my homeworld, she said solemnly, until the bond finds balance through reciprocal sacrifice or the preservation of your life. Davin considered this, idly noting that the lingering heat from her presence made the cantina considerably more comfortable than it had been before. So you're my bodyguard now, because I shared a sandwich? Not just any sandwich, Tempest corrected, her voice taking on an almost reverent tone. One seasoned with the flame spices of the homeworld. I have never tasted such perfect heat, such exquisite burning. Where did you acquire such treasures? Earth, Davin replied. They're called chili peppers. Capsicum, if you want to get technical. Tempest's flame hair flared brighter with what could only be excitement. The legendary fire fruits of the human homeworld? I thought they were myth. Very real and very expensive this far from home, Davin said with a grin. I take it your people would be interested in a legitimate trade arrangement? Interested? Tempest laughed, the sound like the crackling of a warm fire. The Pirathi Collective would empty their treasuries for a reliable supply of genuine flame spices. But double quotes, her expression grew troubled. I am no longer in a position to negotiate such arrangements. I have been cast out, dishonored. What happened? Her flame hair dimmed slightly. I questioned the wisdom of our traditional warfare practices, suggested that perhaps there were ways to resolve conflicts without burning entire worlds to ash. The Council of Flames deemed my ideas insufficiently fiery. Sounds familiar, Davin observed. I've met a few other people recently who got in trouble for thinking differently than their elders. You have? Long story. But it seems to me that someone with your warrior training and my spice connections could build quite a profitable partnership. Interested? Tempest's patterns began to glow brighter, and the air around them grew pleasantly warm again. You would trust a dishonored flame dancer with such valuable cargo? I would trust someone brave enough to question authority and smart enough to recognize the value of genuine partnerships, Davin replied. Besides, having a living furnace as a business partner has its advantages. Think of the heating bills we'll save. For the first time since he'd noticed her, Tempest's expression was genuinely joyful. Her flame hair blazed with colors he hadn't seen before, shifting through the entire spectrum, from deep red to brilliant white. There is wisdom in your words, Spicebringer, she said formally. I accept your proposal, but know that the flame bond remains. Where you go, I follow. Your enemies become mine to burn. Davin raised his glass of synthetic whiskey in a toast. To profitable partnerships and sacred bonds. To flame and spice. Tempest agreed, her own drink steaming in her grip. May they burn eternal. As they clinked glasses, Davin couldn't help but notice that his seemed to have gotten considerably warmer. This was going to be an interesting partnership indeed. Outside the cantina's viewport, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, indifferent to the small dramas of mortals. But in one small corner of the galaxy, a spice trader and a disgraced warrior had found something worth defending in each other. All because of the simple act of sharing a meal, the flame bond would endure, earning bright across the void between worlds.